If I were to ask those of you who are here and ask our viewers online in whatever city you live in, how many homeless people are living unsheltered in your community? Do you think you have any kind of a grasp of how many people that is? Not the number living in homeless shelters, but how many people in your community are living under bridges, in sewers, living in tents hidden in the woods, sometimes even in city parks. It's a fluid number, of course. It changes with the seasons, but for most of the year, Springfield has about 500 people, mostly men, but also some women and children, who are what we call sleeping hard, that is, unsheltered in any meaningful way. Now, I walk a lot for exercise, so I walk around streets where there's typically no foot traffic. So I do get to hear and see where a lot of these unsheltered people are. Typically, they will have a little campground actually close to the intersection where you see people panhandling at major intersections. They sit holding signs, asking for donations, and within 100 yards or so, there's usually a tent and a campfire. Now, when the police realize where they are in an established camp, they'll usually come and clear them out, throwing away whatever belongings that they've accumulated. The highway department will even come after them and cut down a grove of trees, mow down weeds to reveal the most popular hiding places. In a neighborhood very close to where I live, there were about 6 people living in tents, hiding in a grove of trees at a major intersection that has now been completely leveled. We don't usually hear about these people until one of them is found dead, most commonly in the winter, dying from freezing. But there are hundreds of them all around us. You would be surprised how many of them live within a mile of your home. You just don't see them. And I would even add, even if you do see them, it doesn't consciously register. You're not looking for them, you don't know them, and probably you don't want to get involved. You don't want to be asked to spend emotional energy on them, let alone money. And frankly, who among us can care about everything? You know, we put up 52 sermons a year minimally, and sometimes it's closer to 60. So I'm asking you to care about something every week. And I know that we can't all have that much compassion or empathy flowing in our veins. But I have to ask along the same lines, do you know how many elementary school students we have in Springfield? Do you have any idea what percentage of them are Black or Native American or Latinx or who are immigrants? What's more, do you have any idea how many of those children woke up in a homeless shelter that morning or in an automobile or a tent? Now, I was not a fan, actually, of the 2009 animated sci-fi movie Avatar. It's almost like they forgot to hire a writer. Lots of money into CGI, but not much into writing. But there was one line that has continued to be very memorable to me. The greetings that the indigenous people of the planet Pandora would often say to one another is, "I see you." In the more intense exchanges, to say, "I see you," is intended to be a reassurance, a way of saying, "I understand you, I get you," and hopefully even, "I respect who you are. I love you. You are not alone." Now, I've been a pastor since I was 22 years old. And I can still remember the day that I drove up to my student church and I saw a sign painter out in front painting my name on the illuminated sign in front of this old First Christian church in Russellville, Kentucky. I didn't have any way of knowing that was going to happen. I hadn't thought about it. I was a kid. My name literally up in lights on the sign, that my name would be on the stationery, on business cards, and very shortly in newspaper stories, because I've always believed that the whole world has a right to my opinion. And eventually, when they got around to inventing the internet, my name would be on websites, on YouTube, on iTunes, and in lots of publications. Now, within the church community at least, I have an identity, and I have carried that identity for my entire adult life. In this context, people see me, they recognize me, and some of them at least tell me that they love me, and I choose to believe that they mean it. Others despise me, and I know that I can believe them. But I know that in this context, I am seen. But my most common personal pastime is to go out to venues like this one, almost 3 or 4 evenings a week, usually to hear some of my friends playing in their bands. So I end up at a table, oftentimes right here, with Paul and Josie, and Paul will come and sit with us during breaks. But even when we go to hear another band, if Paul and Josie and I are out listening to Papa Green Shoes or someone else, people will come up and talk to them. Paul is, I have to say, one of the most gifted guitarists that I have ever seen anywhere at any time. Beyond that, a tremendous vocalist who, as remarkable human beings go, there are more song lyrics in his head than most musicians have on their computer. And so everybody in the room who is at least an aspiring guitarist, or even the guys that make guitars or who play in bands, they always want to come and talk to Paul. And it doesn't matter if we're right in the middle of a conversation, they just walk up and start talking. Because in that context, I have to admit, I am less than nobody. I can't play an instrument. God knows I can't sing. And Sean could tell you, I can't even clap with the rhythm. I sit there silently stroking my beard like a Greek philosopher who's lost in thought, because I know that when you all are like this, I'm like this, and so I've just stopped trying. But sitting with Paul and Josie is a little bit like sitting with British royalty in a nightclub. People come up and talk to them. They'll interrupt our conversation. They sometimes will literally physically lean over me to talk to them as if I were a piece of furniture. And a couple of them will actually stand right in front of my face. So I've got a bird's eye view, not of the stage, but of their crotch or their butt while they're talking to Paul. And folks, I'm 6'2", and I'm not going to tell you how much I weigh, but I will assure you this, I do not have to jump around in the shower to get wet. But they don't see me because I'm in a music venue and I'm not a musician. I'm sitting with a musician, but I'm not a musician, and I absolutely become invisible. And I keep thinking that after all these years, someone's going to ask me how Soren Kierkegaard invented existentialism. And I have an answer ready. I haven't even, in this very intensely biblically oriented community, no one's ever asked me to explain how Marcion influenced the shape of the New Testament. And in fact, the story about how Marcion influenced the shaping of the New Testament is intensely interesting, and yet no one ever brings it up. Now, I'm often the center of attention in church on Sunday morning, but if you see me sitting out here on a Thursday night, I'm not anything more than a bump on a log. I might get really frustrated when Paul sings Blackbird and people are still talking. I have asked a few of them to stop. I have emphatically asked a few of them to stop, and even they will ignore me. So the fact that you don't know how many school children woke up in a homeless shelter, had to try to find their homework in the chaos of a room in a shelter, find their backpack, and get to the bus on time. That's not really much of a surprise because those kids don't have college degrees. Their names are not on anyone's stationery. Their names have not been painted on business signs or showing up on websites. They haven't published any books. They haven't bought a house in your neighborhood or even had a job. And frankly, they tend to be very short, really short. And some of them don't even weigh as much as my right leg. What's more, the ones that are growing up in poverty have a very high chance of remaining in poverty for the rest of their lives. One of the reasons that people immigrated to this continent was because of the structured class system in Europe. It was almost impossible to move from poverty into the middle class or the upper class. And now, in the United States, it is less likely to move out of poverty into the middle class than it is for someone born in Great Britain to move out of poverty to the middle class. The very reason that my ancestors left Great Britain is the reason why people might leave the United States and go to England. These kids are not even likely to live as long as the children who didn't grow up in poverty. They die younger, they're sicker. And now you can define poverty in lots of different ways. If you talk technically about family income that is below the poverty line, we would say that 12% of the children in the United States grow up in that level of poverty. But there's lots of ways of looking at poverty. Free and reduced lunches, I think, the kids that qualify for free and reduced lunches, that's probably a better tell. So what percentage of the 12,000 children in Springfield's public schools would you guess are receiving free and reduced lunches? It'd be a shame, wouldn't it, if it was even 1 in 10. This is the richest country in the world. This is the richest country in the history of the world. But what if it was more than 1 in 10? What if it was half? You don't see them unless they're members of your own family, but there are thousands of them. The truth is, here in Springfield, 60% of the children in our school system are on free and reduced lunches, growing up in what any one of us would call poverty. But folks, that's just the average. More than 90% of the kids who go to Campbell, McGregor, Weaver, Williams, and York elementary schools are growing up in poverty. 95% of the students at McGregor. But you're all good people. Look at you. You're in church, sort of. It's sort of a church with a bar. Do you know where McGregor Elementary School is? It's on West Madison, just a few blocks west of Missouri State University. And 95% of those kids are living in poverty, and almost none of them will ever transverse those few blocks from McGregor to sit in a classroom at MSU. Success in life is something of a race. That's how our competitive economy works. You have to compete. You have to be one of the best if you want to get ahead. But in a real race, don't all the runners have the same starting line as well as the same finishing line? Because you know, if it's a 100-yard dash, but 60% of the kids have to start a half mile behind the starting line, that's not much of a race, is it? We already know who's going to win. Childhood poverty in America is a nearly invisible force to those who are not immediately familiar with it. Now, you school teachers know, social workers know, but eventually employers will know when they try to find an employee who can read an instruction manual or who can even make accurate change at a drive-through window. But most of us never see these kids until their trajectory has been, if not written in stone, it is very near to determined. There is no way to make up for a lost childhood. And poverty, if you've never been in it, I can tell you, is a form of violence. It's not just hunger, but it puts families into stresses that lead to crime, that lead to substance abuse, and it can cause mental illness, and it certainly causes domestic violence. These children also often become parents while they are still children. And it is a heartbreaking fact that an awful lot of those young women giving birth in their childhood had no choice in the matter. Most of us who have known young couples who were struggling to get started in life have heard them say that they were putting off having children until they could afford it. But in America, when you finish a graduate degree with a tremendous amount of student debt, you're likely to never be able to afford it. And the United States typically doesn't give parents paid leave to be with a baby when they're first born. Child care options for the poor are typically pretty awful to non-existent, especially for those who don't have an immediate family member who is able to basically put their own life on hold and raise a second generation of children. Only the poorest of the poor on Medicaid get access to decent health care. And here in Missouri, our governor has decided not to expand Medicare to those that need it the most, possibly causing as many as 60,000 unnecessary deaths a year by a governor that should have never become governor. Now, we patch up some of these problems with after-school programs, with Head Start. We give backpacks with canned food for some of these kids to take home with them on the weekends. We give kids in shelters a brand new backpack full of school supplies in them when school starts. And that is helpful. That should be done. But you know, have you ever had to put cardboard inside your shoes to cover the hole in the bottom of your shoes? And if you have, did you ever have to walk in the rain in a shoe that was sealed up with cardboard? Can you imagine how it might change these kids' lives if we stopped just patching it and actually gave a living wage to their parents? Imagine this greater society that we could have if we simply gave the parents of young children an extra financial shot in the arm every month. Right now in Italy, they are closing maternity wards in hospitals because no one's having children. In Germany, they have plowed up entire neighborhoods and turned them into parks because the population growth has become negative. And environmentally, you can applaud that, I suppose, but the fact is, an awful lot of families, even in China, are not having any children. After years of a one-child policy, they're having none because they're trying to financially get on top of their own issues. Now, whenever I'm trying to explain social ethics, I like to draw it down to a manageable size. If you think of a shipwreck on a tropical island, there are 100 people on a ship, they're all living on an island now, and let's say 20 of those are children. How many of those 20 children are y'all going to feed? How many of them would you educate? How many would you take care of when they're sick? Well, if there were 100 people living on an island, you'd take care of all of them, wouldn't you? You'd make sure that every one of those kids got more or less the same education, had more or less the same housing and health care, because you would know them. You would know their names. You couldn't avoid seeing them. And you know their parents. So you wouldn't dream of picking one of those 20 kids and giving them a swimming pool and a pony while not giving shoes and clothes to the rest of them. But folks, that is what we are doing in America. If we could just draw our communities down to a size where we could actually see them, we wouldn't tolerate what is going on every day in this city. And it is hard to fix a traumatized childhood. I stay mad about how children have been treated at our southern border. The images, not just during the Trump administration, but for years before the Trump administration, and even right now. These kids in cages, these kids in detention centers, we know that their psychological problems are going to last a lifetime. But we don't have to go to Texas or Arizona to see children whose childhoods are traumatizing them. As terrible as the COVID-19 pandemic has been, it has given the new Biden administration an opportunity to see what really needs to change about America. There have been stimulus checks for almost everyone. There have been subsidies for the unemployed. Even I have received payroll protection grants. And now there's this infrastructure bill that has tons of money in it to fix roads and bridges, to upgrade our power grid, to expand broadband internet access, and to add some cyber protections for our water, gas, and electric systems. But a lot of it isn't traditional infrastructure. Because what is infrastructure if humanity itself is under a curse? Maybe it's because the First Lady, Jill Biden, is a school teacher. I think she's probably had some influence on this. I suspect that Jill Biden has spent a few years schooling Joe Biden in some of the facts of life that he might not have otherwise known. You may already be aware that President Lyndon Johnson, who actually did do the most to fight poverty in America and to improve the standard of living for those who had fallen through the cracks and to help with the civil rights movement, he did this in large part because he started out his adult life as a public school teacher. In Texas, in a poor school, he saw what it was like to only speak Spanish when you started school. He saw what it was like to live in a dangerous neighborhood and to try to make it to class and pay attention. And I believe that Lyndon Johnson remembered a lot of the names of those students when it was time to pass a lot of the civil rights acts. Now, those of you who've listened to me for the past couple of years know that there's just something I cannot deny today with a straight face. I had exactly zero confidence that Joe Biden would be a transformational president. I believed he would be a better president than the last guy, but trust me, I've got a pair of old sneakers in my garage that I wear when I cut the grass that would make a better president than what's his name that used to be president. But Biden is turning out to be more progressive than I ever dreamed he could be. And this infrastructure bill, if it gets passed, will put Biden on the stage right next to Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. Because this idea of giving parents paid leave when they have a child and giving them a monthly subsidy as they raise their children, that will change America. He has proposed giving parents a monthly check that if you've got 4 kids, and I grew up in a house with 4 kids, those parents will get about $1,000 a month while they're raising those children. Paul came out of a family of 9. Can you imagine how your childhood would have been different if your mom and dad had been getting $2,300 a month every month? It's not enough to live on with 9 kids, not enough to make you want to have another kid to get a little more money, but it is enough to lift 5 million children out of poverty and make life significantly better for another 5 million, moving them at least closer to the starting line of that competitive race that they've all got to run in. Now, this is not a unique stroke of genius. I mean, I'm really happy about it, and I'm publicly praising our president, but it's not like this was a hard thing to see. Tony Blair did the same thing in Great Britain 20 years ago when he was prime minister. But no one has ever even suggested doing this for American children. And I am not too proud to say from a pulpit, it's about damn time. Let the congregation say, Amen. As cynical as we can all be about government and corporations and the media, I got to remind you that good things can still happen, even in America, if enough of us get behind a really good idea and push until it's able to happen. Now, this stimulus bill isn't perfect. I don't know why people like us have received stimulus checks during the pandemic, and then this infrastructure bill is just going to get half of the children out of poverty. I would have voted to get 100% of children out of poverty before people that didn't lose their jobs, before a corpulent cleric in the Ozarks gets stimulus checks. Couldn't we get all of the children out of poverty? But, you know, we cannot let the perfect get in the way of the good. This proposed stimulus act doesn't have much of a chance of making it through the Senate unless all of us make it very clear that we expect to see it passed. I can speak to the ethics of this situation as a spiritual person because it ought to be done. Looking the other way and not seeing childhood poverty is just wrong on the face of it. But I can also speak to this issue as a patriot. There are no foreign powers, not Russia, not China, not North Korea, not terrorists, either foreign or domestic, that pose a greater threat to the future of America than the wide gap in income and in capital, which are two different things. But there's a huge disparity in income and there's a huge disparity in wealth. The wealth gap in the United States of America will end the United States of America if we don't fix it. And I know of no more effective way to do that than to pull children out of poverty and put them all on the same starting line with everyone else. Because if you can't see how wrong it is now, you will see it 20 years from now when you need their gifts to have been educated and disciplined to exist in this nation, in science, in technology, in medicine, in government, in your neighborhood, in the people who marry your kids and your grandkids. We have been forcing America's potential to grow up in poverty. And you and I both know that that's nothing but mean to them. But honestly, it's stupid for all of the rest of us. If we have cut the knees out from under half of our future inventors, scientists, physicians, writers, poets, musicians, we are impoverishing the whole world. And now we can start to change it if we are tired of looking the other way. I'll close by just repeating the last line of our prayer of meditation this morning. Help us, we pray, to find our better selves, our more creative, problem-solving selves, that we might create a more just society. Thank you.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.